Hey, good afternoon. This is Greg Custer. I'm the founder and CEO of Choosing Mexico. I want to thank you for joining us to expand your Mexico for Living horizons. This is a Zoom session I'm trying to do each Wednesday night. And so I will be posting these at YouTube so they can be seen and shared with other people who are considering overseas living. Tonight's topic are the pitfalls of Mexico for living. And what I'm going to try and do is hone in on, well, I started with 5, but I ended up with 7 things that you should seriously take into account, making what could be one of the most important life decisions you will make later in life, and that is deciding to live in a foreign country. Just to start with, I want to emphasize how important it is to have a realistic approach to living and retirement in Mexico. And unfortunately, some guides and websites seem to present Mexico as being this sort of a living fantasy, right? Peppered with words like, paradise cheap, margarita sunsets. And Mexico does offer some truly astounding places and lifestyles. However, moving to a new country, as I said, could be one of the biggest decisions you're making, and adapting and settling into a new culture that you're not familiar with is going to take research. It's going to take planning and your considered intentions. A lot of the literature about moving to Mexico is focused on great weather and cheap living, and certainly Mexico can comply with those 2 characteristics, but it takes patience, it takes understanding, it takes compromise, and I would say a sense of humor to be successful in achieving your goals of retirement peace of mind, which is the bottom line, I think, for many people who are exploring overseas living. Advance the slide here. The map I like to start with is one that kind of points out the fact that, yes, there are U.S. citizens living in all 32 states in Mexico. Right now, according to the New York Times, there's about 12 million passport holders, U.S. passport holders, who are living overseas. And the number 1 destination by far is people who are with their U.S. passports living across Mexico. This map, which is something I publish at Choosing Mexico, will show you some of the mini zones across the country that are popular. Of course, many of them are in coastal regions, but a number of them are also inland destinations. And so if you really are paying attention to the content I publish at Choosing Mexico and Mexico for Living, you'll see that if you keep your focus just on coastal locations, you're kind of selling yourself short because Mexico is a remarkable country, 32 states, one of the 5 most biodiverse countries on the planet Earth, and one of the few places in the world where you can experience and embrace 30 centuries of human cultural evolution. And we're going to talk about that and how embracing Mexico and its extraordinary story of human evolution and this remarkable backdrop of different climates, different ecological zones, different altitudes, from deserts in the north to tropical rainforests in the south. It really is a country of extraordinary diversity. And it's a diversity that a lot of foreigners have really not experienced because of the fact they've probably been vacationing in Mexico and focused on sort of the 3 areas that for the last 20 years have dominated Mexico vacation travel. And those areas you can see on the map here would be Baja California Sur. So this would be the Los Cabos area, which continues to expand both up the Pacific coast and the Sea of Cortez coast. The second area would be that orange spot down the Pacific coast that says Nayarit and Jalisco. This is Banderas Bay, which is one of the most popular Pacific coast destinations for travelers from the United States. And then the third region that really dominates coastal travel to Mexico would be over in the state of Quintana Roo, which is one of the two youngest states in Mexico, only became a state in the 1970s, and it gets about 40% of all Mexico visitation to places like Cancun, the Riviera Maya, Tulum, the island of Cozumel, which is the largest cruise port on the planet Earth, believe it or not, in terms of annual arrivals. So I'd like to start with giving you the understanding that, yes, all 32 states in Mexico have U.S. citizens living in them, but these are the places that tend to attract the 55 plus crowd who are basically coming to Mexico to have a fulfilling later years in life, and also are confronting a very key part of living overseas, and that is longevity, and the fact that, you know, the idea of retiring at 65 to live a maybe, you know, have a life of another 5 to 10 years for many, many people. In fact, longevity has made their retirement years a really significant chunk of time. And I believe that Mexico can be a very viable solution for that Act 3 in your life. And we're going to talk about that, and as well as some of the pitfalls that, of course, you need to be aware of. So let's get right into it. Again, another map of Mexico. I'm speaking to you today from my home in the state of Jalisco, and the largest lake in Mexico, which is Lake Chapala, largest natural freshwater lake. And I've lived here since 2015. And some of you may know, I moved here after a long career in Mexico tourism. I've worked for over 40 years in Mexico tourism. And when I moved here, I brought my mother with me. And my mom was 82 years old and needed better health care. And we found a solution, our family did, to bring my mom here, and she lived very comfortably in an assisted living facility here lakeside. And I'll ask you to mute if you haven't already, or we're doing this starting to the presentation. Okay. So let's get to the 7 pitfalls. I know there are going to be 5, but I just couldn't hold back. So here we go. The first one is don't move to the coast without first having visited between May and October. A lot of people naturally explore living in Mexico in places they've vacationed. And most people are vacationing in Mexico during the high season, when the weather is great, from, you know, November to April. And if you're on the Pacific coast or in Baja, you're going to wake up and have, you know, moderate temperatures, blue skies every morning. If you're in the Mexican Caribbean, you're going to wake up to, you know, that beautiful turquoise water, and generally very moderate temperatures. However, Mexico basically is ruled by a 2 weather season pattern, and that is the dry season and the rainy season. And I've talked to people, I know people who first instinct was to live on the beach. Who doesn't want to live on the beach? But you can find out within weeks and months some of the pitfalls of that, because if you have not lived in a climate that has very high temperatures and high humidity, you're going to be spending a lot of time living indoors. You're going to have higher electric bills, and your outdoor living, which should be part of why you're embracing Mexico, is going to be somewhat compromised. So I'm not against living on the coast, but make sure you know what you're getting into, especially during the period from May to October. And also realize that many coastal areas in Mexico, most of them, with some exceptions, are subject to hurricane season. And that's certainly true of the Pacific coast, and even Baja California, which has been hit with frequency over the last 10 years. And of course, the Caribbean coast of Mexico is in a hurricane pattern, which can seriously compromise, you know, your sustainability of living in some of these places as those seasons get more robust and last longer. The other thing I warn people about, another pitfall, is don't bring all your stuff. The tendency for many people is to essentially, yes, do some liquidation, you know, do the piles of stuff I'm going to give away, stuff I'm going to sell, stuff I'm going to throw in the trash, but they're still left with a lot of belongings. And my feeling is that if you're going to try and replicate your home in the United States in Mexico, that's a mistake. Why? Because you're going to spend a lot of money moving down here. You could experience, you know, breakage along the way, of course, though there's some very good movers who you can confidently put your belongings, you know, in their care. But you're going to find out that Mexico, especially since the early 20th century, has been fully embraced by American box store commercialism. So it's not uncommon at all that no matter just about where you're living in Mexico, you will have access to certainly Costco's and Walmart's and Bed Bath and Beyond's, Pottery Barns, and all of these places where you can acquire home furnishings and actual furniture and avoid the cost of bringing your stuff down. So I know that that's a very hard thing to do. I know that for some people it will provoke a cycle where you're putting things in storage, and that can cost hundreds of dollars a month. But I do hesitate. And when I see people who have kind of tried to move their entire household, they sometimes regret it after the fact, because essentially everything is available here. We even have IKEA in Mexico now. The other pitfall I like to recommend to people is don't bring your car into Mexico. Buy a car once you're down here. The ability to normalize and get a Mexican plate on your vehicle has been pretty dramatically restricted to basically cars that are made in the NAFTA trade zone. And you can actually go on websites and put in the VIN number of your vehicle. And if you have a German or an Asian import that was not assembled in Mexico, you're not going to be able to bring that car in. And that's going to require that you are every 6 months essentially driving to the border to renew a permit and then coming back into the country. And Mexican immigration is discouraging that kind of perpetual tourist cycle. You can certainly bring your car in, but remember that unlike moving to, Ecuador, I'm nothing against Ecuador, but Mexico produces and exports more and more cars to the United States from every brand you can think of. We have Teslas in Mexico now. Volkswagen operates a huge plant in Puebla that makes Volkswagens, Audis, and Porsches. The city of Aguascalientes is the Nissan capital of North America. Right here in Jalisco, Honda makes all their CRVs about 20 miles from where I live. So your ability to get any car in Mexico and buy a Mexican already plated car is definitely the way to go. So that's my tip number 3. Number 4 is rent, then consider buying. This is a personal belief of mine that people who come to Mexico and are immediately seeing realtors and looking at property, they can end up buying property that is not in the long term in their best interest. And that can have to do with not understanding the neighborhood, not understanding seasonality, not understanding how bus routes can change from time to time, not understanding how your property handles severe weather in case of summer rains. So renting is a very, very good idea. And even buying in Mexico is going to come with certain pitfalls also in terms of maintenance, in terms of playing the capital games game in Mexico and selling your property. A lot of people will purchase properties expecting that they're going to realize fantastic returns when the reality is, especially for homes priced above $500,000, and depending on the market that you're in, you can wait years and years before you get a buyer walking in the door. So I'm very much an advocate of renting and renting again, and then consider the purchase option. Okay. My 5th of my 7 pitfalls is be very careful who you inform about your move overseas, because there are some institutions that you deal with back home that are not going to be comfortable doing business with you if you're not living in the United States. And I'll cite 3 in particular. Very likely your bank, once you tell them that you've left the United States, is going to want to cancel your account, because many national banks do not want to deal with people who are not US residents. The second one is Medicare Advantage. It's very likely that Medicare is going to know you're living in Mexico, and that really doesn't matter. But Medicare Advantage is a program of services that are only available if you are residing in the United States. And there's a lot of literature right now and writing online about being able to use Medicare Advantage in Mexico. And there are many, many successful cases of that, but it's sort of a loophole in the sense that Medicare Advantage is assuming that address you gave them in, San Luis Obispo is where you're actually living, and they're not inquiring about, whether you've changed your residency or not. So you do not want to tell Medicare Advantage that you've moved overseas, and you may in fact be able to use Medicare Advantage for accidents and emergencies. The third person you probably don't want to tell is your financial planner, because many financial planners are fiduciaries, and they will say, look, if you're not a resident of the United States, I cannot help you. And I actually know a woman who did all three of these things in one day and came rushing into the Lake Chapala Society, which is a community center that we have here in Ajijic, in a state of panic because all three of those interactions resulted in her programs being canceled. So I'm not saying you have to be deceptive, but there's no reason you have to disclose the fact that you've moved overseas to these institutions unless you're willing to change the relationship and lose these programs. Number 6 is it's important you have realistic expectations about your medical care needs. And I would sort of add to this also your mobility needs. Mexico is a developing country, which means that many of the places you're going to be looking at are going to have inferior infrastructure when it comes to sidewalks, ramps. You may be living in a 16th century colonial town that's going to be riddled with all sorts of obstacles, both below and above. And so if you have mobility challenges, you're going to want to understand that getting around Mexico, certainly in wheelchairs or even with people who cannot walk long distances, is going to be a serious inhibitor of how you move around. Regarding medical care needs, yes, Mexican medical care can be first world, greatest care you'll get anywhere, but understand that the private medical care system in Mexico, so these are private hospitals, private specialists and physicians, they do charge prices that are still affordable by US standards, but a hospital stay in Mexico, if you don't have insurance, can run into the tens of thousands of dollars. So what most of us end up doing is sort of straddling the US system and the Mexico system. So we go out of pocket in Mexico for doctor visits, prescriptions, tests, which are all significantly cheaper than what you're used to back home. But we keep our Medicare, and we also have a Medicare Advantage program so that we can schedule more extensive procedures during our annual or twice annual trip back to the United States. So yes, you can go out of pocket for a lot of things, but also remember that once you reach age 65, your ability to purchase private insurance in Mexico is extremely difficult, if not impossible, and you could be facing premiums that run into the thousands and thousands of dollars a year. So if you're under 65, yes, you can buy private medical insurance that gets you into the best hospitals, and it can be affordable. But once you hit 65, if you're not already in that private insurance system, you're basically not going to be able to get in at that point. In which case, you need to start looking at other options for care, and make sure you keep that U.S. Medicare and Medicare Advantage alive and functioning. And the last one I have is something that I think a lot of people understand, but I want to reinforce it again, is that if you're primarily coming to Mexico because it's inexpensive, it's close by, you don't need to speak a foreign language, and the weather is great, you're really missing out. I think that coming here means embracing extraordinary country in terms of history, human cultural evolution, seeing natural spaces. Mexico has 35 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, more than any country in the Western Hemisphere. And so I think your long-term sustainable happiness is diminished the longer you stay in the gringo bubble. Now, I live in the gringo bubble to some extent. I'm in an apartment with 17 units, and all of my neighbors are from the United States or Canada. And if you don't speak Spanish, then you're going to be somewhat hesitant to engage in community life where you're living. But if you can understand Mexican manners, conquer the basics of Spanish, and learn something about this extraordinary country, your level of happiness, sustained happiness, and peace of mind is going to be greatly extended, I think. I also want to mention that I do together with Mexperience, I do lifestyle consulting. These are 1-hour sessions where you can submit your questions in advance. We'll schedule a time that's convenient for you, and I will follow up with some suggestions detailing things we've talked about on the call. So with that, I'll wrap things up today. Here is my contact information. Please don't sign off. We'll be continuing this discussion in just a moment, but thank you so much for expanding your Mexico horizons with choosing Mexico. Okay,